Hello, my name is Putkonen. Thank you for joining me. Today I'm talking about not remembering the self, but being the self. I thought I would point this out as it seems to be another point of departure or contention that I have with some teachers. I was rereading a book by Annamali Swami. I guess he was a disciple of Ramana Maharshi. But he makes a big deal of remembering the self, and he often recommends for people to remember the self. He also liked affirmations. And I think both of these is really the wrong track. It's the wrong way. It's not about remembering the self or affirmations, because both of these are mental processes. Memory is about mental processing, particularly the past. To remember the self is to remember a concept from the past. And so remembering the self is usually people having some concept of self, and they're trying to hold this concept in mind all the time, as if they're trying to convince themselves of it. This kind of reminds me of an old, Hindu metaphor or analogy. There's a story of a kingdom. A king and queen had a newborn, and somebody came in the middle of the night and stole the baby, and he disappeared. And as it turned out, through circumstance and happenstance, but the baby ended up being found and adopted by a gang of bandits and thieves. And years later, the king became ill and died, and so the body of the prince was never found, and the prince would now be king. So they sent out people to look for the prince, and eventually they found someone who looked like a spitting image of his father or grandfather or something, but recognized it as royalty, and he's brought to the capital and to the castle, where he meets the queen and others, and it's apparent to them that this is the lost prince. And so they tell them, you are the lost prince, and so you are heir and now king. And we want you to rule the kingdom. For him, he believes and thinks of himself as a thief. And so he's like, well, I guess I could play along. I mean, he just can't believe it. He goes, well, I guess I can play along and maybe steal a few things and disappear in the night at some point. But he's in this castle and is constantly trying to remember that he's the king. It's almost like he's repeating themselves. I'm the king. I'm the king. I got to remember I'm the king. Because somebody would, do something, and he would act like he always acts, not what you would normally think how a king would act. But at the same time, the king is free to do whatever they want, and so he doesn't have to act a certain way. And so there's this dichotomy of what he thinks a king should be, and he doesn't believe he's that, and he's trying to remember he's that, and he's trying to play the part of that. At the same time, he really believes he's a thief, and he's looking to see what he can steal and disappear in the night. So it's an interesting kind of story analogy. But that is much like what people are like. We believe we are this little me, this separate, limited me in the world, and we do not realize what we really are. And you may bump into a teacher, an elder, and they'll, in spirituality, and they'll tell you, no, you are that. You are that. And then what happens is you don't really believe it. You still feel I'm this little me, but you keep being told you're that, and so you come up with a concept of what that is and the self, and then you try to remember that and try to act like what you think living from the self would be. It's the exact same story, I'm just kind of laying it out how it works. Trying to remember that you're the self is not the point. The point is to realize you're the self. You have to delve into it deeply enough, because if that thief really researched his own past, he might have been able to track down something where he could see clearly, no, the queen is my mother. The king was my father. And there are no other heirs, so that would make me king. And at that point, he would no longer have to remember he's king, because it would have been viscerally internalized, you could say, and he would just be king. At that point, he's being king. He doesn't have to think and remember, oh, I'm king. So I got to act like this and do that and the other thing. And so you just be king. And likewise, if you delve into who and what you think you are, saw that you're not that, see the false as false. Oh, I'm not the me. I'm not this. I'm not that. You might come to the realization of self, and then you're just being self. There's no need to remember the self. If you're being the self, you'll never forget. No one could convince you otherwise at that point. No one could walk up and go, no, you are the body and mind. You are this person, from the ID in your wallet. You are this person. You're not the self. You're not something else. No one could convince you of that if you deeply realized the self. If you were being self, you would have no doubt in it and could not be convinced otherwise. It is just deeply known, deeply felt. Self alone is. Self is unlimited. And so there's never a identification with something limited. And if someone tries to walk up and go, no, you're wrong. No, you really are this limited being, and yada, yada, yada. They could not convince me about that. And some people are very, very attached to duality and just don't understand non-duality. And so if they happen to hear a phrase or catch a piece of my video or something, and they approach me sometimes saying, no, you really are, a human being. You really are this little me. You really do have a gender and a name and yada, yada. They're just, talking to a wall or talking to space. I mean, there's no way they could convince me that I am that, because I'm not any of that. And it's not because I remember the self. It's because I am self. I'm being self. Ever-present being, ever-present knowing. It's not a matter of memory, which is of the past, which is conceptual. Remembering the self is not the way. I would say remembering the self, or the related trying to affirm that you're the self, is just playing a mental game. And it's not going to cause you to really realize what you are. Because what you need to see is whatever you're identifying with, you need to see you're not that. If you deeply see you're not that, and you cease identifying with that, and you cease, being that, then that frees you up to be what you really are. Because, of course, in non-duality, there's only the self, and you can only be the self. But what I'm saying in being something else is you are being or acting from the point, from the standpoint of being something limited, something with circumference and center, something that is not self. Because so many people are being themselves, and then themselves, their being, is limited. is chronically suffering, is having all these issues, is seeking liberation, yada, yada, yada. You know, being that is what needs to be seen through. Being that is what needs to be shattered. And then there's an opportunity to be what you really are. Because you are that. You are self. Self alone exists. But it's not a mental game. It's a deep seeing, a visceral seeing through the illusion, a shattering of the illusion. It's a getting rid of the misunderstanding and ignorance within the body-mind. And when the ignorance and misunderstanding is removed and the self is realized, it's viscerally, intuitively, non-conceptually, basically you're being it. You just automatically go to being it. Then you don't have to remember. Like the thief, you don't need to keep reminding yourself, I'm the king, I'm the king. No, when after realization you have to remind yourself, I'm the self, I'm the self. You don't need to do that. You are the self. You couldn't be otherwise. And it's never doubted. And you could not be convinced otherwise. It's not a mental process, and so it's not through remembering, it's not through affirmations. It's through being. But if you got any questions, comments, please post below. But until next time, thank you much.